The laughter hit me before I even reached the grand doors. It rolled out from the ballroom like waves, elegant, high-pitched, tinged with the kind of cruelty only money can sugarcoat. Glasses clinked. Music rose from a live jazz band. I caught a whiff of truffle oil, roses, and expensive perfume before the doorman even opened the door. The Astoria Grand Ballroom was a fortress of marble, gold trim, and old money excess. Everything gleamed, polished to perfection, spotless, untouchable, just like the people inside. I took one last deep breath before stepping in, pretending the tightness in my chest was from the dress, not nerves. The hush was subtle but immediate. Heads turned, eyes flicked toward me with precise, polished judgment. Not because I was late, not because I looked out of place, but because I was alone. "There she is," someone near the bar whispered. I recognized the voice instantly. Lila, my cousin, Samantha's loyal shadow and Instagram soulmate. She held a champagne flute like it was an extension of her ego. "Brave of her to show up solo," Lila added with a sip and a smirk. "Still single, I guess." "It's honestly sad," another voice chimed in, low but not low enough. "My sister Samantha, the bride." Her perfect teeth gleamed under the chandelier, lights as she leaned in to whisper to a bridesmaid, loud enough to ensure I'd hear. "I wouldn't have come if I were her." My heels clicked slowly across the marble floor, borrowed shoes that pinched, scuffed just slightly at the toes. The navy blue dress I wore wasn't designer, wasn't new. I'd stitched it together, in the evenings after work, 3 nights in a row, under a yellow lamp in my walk-up apartment. Rent had come first. Fabric was secondhand. My lipstick was drugstore red. My nails were bare. But my back was straight. My eyes were forward. And my skin had grown thick after years of this. No one moved to greet me. My parents sat at the VIP table beneath a massive floral arch. My father didn't glance up. My mother gave a brief side-eye and turned her head sharply, as if my presence had soured her champagne. My brother, once my closest confidant, now a trust fund stoic, adjusted his cufflink and looked right through me. I found my table, labeled Extended Family and Singles. It was near the back, past the glittering tiered cake and closer to the coat check than the dance floor. I slid into my seat, spine still straight, even though my stomach twisted into knots. The chair was cold. The napkin felt too crisp. I reached for a glass of water, wishing it were something stronger. "Claire?" a voice chirped from behind. I turned. Aunt Martha, Mom's older sister, always in pearls, always in judgment. She leaned over from her table, just close enough for the women around her to lean in. "Still single?" she asked, her voice syrupy. "At your age, I figured someone would have at least tried to lock you down." I offered a tight smile, the kind that hides bruises made from words. "Nice to see you too, Aunt Martha." She grinned, satisfied, and turned back to her friends. I looked down at the place card on the table. Claire Monroe. Just that. No +1. No frills. No flourish. I could feel the eyes. The ones that scanned my shoes, noted the off-brand bag, the dress that didn't scream designer label. I could feel them recalculating their assumptions, adjusting their pity. To them, I was the family afterthought. The one who left the path. Who worked in a bookstore. Who lived in a 1-bedroom in the city instead of marrying a hedge fund manager. I was the daughter who didn't get mentioned in holiday cards, the sister who wasn't tagged in Instagram posts, the one who chose to walk away. And so they decided I had failed. A waiter passed by and didn't stop at my table. No champagne, no hors d'oeuvres, just silence. The jazz band struck up a classic tune, Ella Fitzgerald, if I wasn't mistaken. The stage lights danced across Samantha's diamond-studded veil as she laughed beside Preston, her golden boy of Vies, a groom. Their table sparkled with favors and family approval. And mine? Mine felt like the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I'd done that enough over the years, in bathrooms and buses and bookstore aisles after a family gathering. Instead, I crossed my ankles beneath the table and lifted my chin. Because tonight, even if no one here believed I deserved to be, I did. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The ballroom doors slammed open with a sharp, sudden boom, not loud enough to be rude, but powerful enough to silence the room. The jazz band missed a beat. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned in unison like a flock sensing a storm. And then he walked in. The man in the doorway stood tall, his charcoal gray suit molded perfectly to his frame, shoulders broad, presence undeniable. Rain clung to his jacket like jewels. His tie was loosened just enough to whisper casual confidence, and his dark hair was damp and tousled in a way that made him look like he'd just stepped off the cover of some luxury magazine. He didn't glance around the room like he needed validation. He walked like he belonged, like the marble beneath his polished shoes had been laid there just for him. And then his eyes found mine. My heart stalled. I didn't know him. Or so I thought. But something about the way he looked at me, direct, warm, as if he'd been looking for me, made my breath catch. He walked toward me. Not to the bride, not to the groom, not to the stage or the VIPs. He strode straight toward the distant family table at the edge of the party. My table. Every eye in the room followed him. Even the servers froze in place. He didn't stop until he stood right in front of me. I stood on instinct, confused, breathless. And then he smiled. Not the performative kind. Something softer, almost tender. "Sorry I'm late, love," he said warmly, slipping a hand around mine. I blinked. My throat went dry. He leaned in just enough for only me to hear. "Play along," he whispered. Then, loud enough for everyone. "Traffic was a nightmare, but I wouldn't miss celebrating your sister's big day." The room exhaled all at once, in a storm of gasps, murmurs, and dropped silverware. Julian Blackwell. I heard the name travel like a ripple through the crowd. That's Julian Blackwell, right? Blackwell Industries? Isn't he worth, like, billions? I stood motionless, hand still in his. His grip was firm, steady, reassuring. My mother turned toward us so fast her pearl earring flew sideways. My father stood halfway from his chair. Samantha's smile cracked. Julian looked around the room, projecting charm like it was second nature. He made direct eye contact with my father. "I'm Julian," he said with a polite nod. "Claire's fiancé." A collective what? Vibrated through the chandeliers. My father's face hardened. "Excuse me?" Julian didn't flinch. We wanted to wait to announce it, but tonight felt right. Samantha stepped down from the stage, her gown glittering like frost, but her face hot with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, barely able to keep her voice low. "You brought a fake fiancé to my wedding?" Julian turned to her calmly. "Fake?" he repeated. "That's a bold assumption. For someone who doesn't even know her sister speaks fluent French, owns 3 patents, and volunteers every weekend." Samantha's mouth parted. He turned toward Preston, her groom. "Preston, right? Pleasure. I read your company's last quarterly report. Ambitious merger next year. Bold move. You might want to revise your tax strategies, though. The write-offs don't hold up." Preston blinked. What?" Julian smiled like he wasn't rattling their entire reality. Then he turned back to me, voice dropping to something gentle again. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. I had no idea how to process what was happening. but I wasn't about to fall apart now. He offered a small, private smile. Good. You looked too alone when I walked in. I couldn't let that stand. And just like that, he gave my hand a soft squeeze and shifted his stance, shielding me from the stares with nothing but presence. My father finally found his voice. Julian Blackwell, he said, cold and incredulous. You expect me to believe you are engaged to her? Julian's jaw tensed slightly, but his voice remained perfectly smooth. I don't owe you an explanation, he said simply. She's been nothing but a disappointment, my father snapped. She walked away from everything, threw away her future. She's the reason her mother... Enough. Julian's voice cut like steel. The room froze again. His gaze darkened, not with anger, with controlled fury. If you think raising your voice or rewriting her story will scare me off, you're mistaken. Silence. Absolute and thick. Julian turned back to me. Come on, he said softly. Let's get some air. Still in a daze, I followed. We walked, past tables of stunned guests, untouched champagne flutes, frozen waiters, and rows of family I hadn't spoken to in years. The doors opened for us, just like they had for him minutes before. We stepped into the cool night air, under a canopy of fairy lights strung across the terrace. Only then did I pull my hand away. What are you doing? I whispered, breathless, overwhelmed. Julian looked down at me, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed like this was all perfectly ordinary. I didn't like how they were treating you, he said simply. I stared at him. You don't know me. He tilted his head. Don't I? There was a flicker of something unspoken behind his eyes. You deserve better, he said. And tonight I figured, why not remind them what they lost? My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't know who this man really was, or why he'd chosen me to defend. But standing beside him, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The night air was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the glittering chaos inside the Astoria Grand Ballroom. The city hummed faintly in the distance, its light pollution casting a soft glow above the terrace. Julian stood beside me beneath a lattice of fairy lights, his hands in his pockets, face unreadable. I folded my arms, more out of instinct than defense. Okay, I said softly, still reeling. Why did you really do it? He turned toward me slowly, his eyes calm but unreadably deep. Do what? I let out a dry laugh. Don't play coy. That stunt, the hand-holding, the fiancé story, the savior entrance. Why? He looked down for a moment, then back up at me. Do you remember the day it rained in October? I blinked. That narrows it down. I mean the day I came into your bookstore. I paused, frowning. The bell above the shop door, the wet footprints on the wood floor. The man who asked for Bel Canto, first edition. I had only one copy. Left. The man with tired eyes and a quiet voice. That was you? I asked, stunned. He nodded. I'd been searching for that book for weeks. Most places didn't even know what I was asking for. You handed it to me without blinking, even though you clearly knew how rare it was, and when I asked if I could place a hold or offer to pay more, I told you to take it, I whispered, remembering now. I said some stories deserve to be held, not shelved. Julian smiled. Exactly. I stared at him, heart hammering louder with each passing second. You remembered that? I never forgot. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if that might steady my breathing. That still doesn't explain any of this. He nodded slowly. After that day, I looked you up. Not because of the book, because of you. You were kind to a stranger in a world that's anything but kind. I shifted uncomfortably. It's just a book." "It wasn't just a book," he said gently. "You didn't just hand me a first edition. You treated me like a person. No recognition, no expectation. You saw me when I was trying to disappear." The words lodged somewhere between my throat and my ribs. Julian continued, quieter now. "I looked into you, Claire. I know that might sound invasive, but I needed to understand why someone like you ended up at a back table tonight, invisible to your own family." "You Googled me?" I asked, still stunned. "No. My assistant did," he said. "She was researching potential directors for a foundation I'm launching. Your name came up because of a blog you wrote about literacy access. Then another piece. Then your name in a grant application you submitted for your nonprofit idea, the community reading program." I felt my knees weaken slightly. "You read that?" He met my eyes. Every word, all 42 pages. My hands trembled at my sides. Saw someone who poured her soul into something good. Someone who followed up with emails that got ignored. Who pitched the idea to her own family at a fundraiser and got laughed at for dreaming too big. I swallowed hard, heat rising behind my eyes. Julian took a step closer. "I also saw photos, family gatherings you weren't invited to, holiday, parties where they cut you out of the frame. Samantha made a post calling herself an only child." A sharp sting hit my chest. She always hated that I didn't fit the mold. She hated that you didn't bend to it. I looked away, ashamed of the tears that threatened to escape. "I saw the way they erased you, Claire, and I hated it. So when I found out Samantha was getting married tonight, and you were on the guest list, alone, I decided I wasn't going to let them keep pretending you didn't matter." The silence between us stretched. "And so, you showed up like a thunderclap," I whispered. He laughed under his breath. "I didn't expect to be quite so dramatic. I planned to sit quietly beside you and maybe walk you out when you had enough. But then I saw you, standing there in that dress, back straight, alone in a room full of sharks. And I couldn't stay silent. I looked down at the floor tiles, their ornate design blurred by the tears clinging to my lashes. You don't know what that meant to me." "I think I do," he said softly. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible in a room full of people who pretend you're not." His voice had a gravity to it, like he wasn't just offering kindness. He was offering understanding. I met his gaze again, unsure whether I felt more exposed or seen. "You didn't have to do this," I murmured. "I know. You don't even know me." "Not everything has to come with conditions," he said. "Sometimes people deserve backup. You walked into that ballroom with more courage than anyone in that room. I just decided to walk beside you." I let the silence settle over us like a weighted blanket. Then I asked quietly, "What now?" He gave me a small smile. "Now we go back inside if you want. Or we leave. Either way, I'll stand where you need me." I studied his face, the way the terrace lights carved gentle shadows across his features. This wasn't a rescue. This was a recognition. A man who'd seen my light when the rest of the world tried to dim it. And somehow, unbelievably, he'd remembered every flicker. The music swelled again as we stepped back into the ballroom, but the atmosphere had shifted. Julian and I crossed the threshold hand in hand, and suddenly, every gaze in the room snapped toward us like magnets pulled by some unseen force. The laughter and clinking glasses didn't return. There was no polite buzz of conversation. Only hush, eyes, phones, tension. But this time, I didn't flinch. Julian's presence beside me was like armor, not shielding me, but amplifying what had already been there. We walked slowly, deliberately, past silver-draped tables and gold-rimmed champagne flutes. Guests tilted their heads. Some whispered behind bejeweled hands. A few glanced nervously at Samantha, whose face was frozen in a cocktail of disbelief and fury. Her posture was perfect, her hair pinned to bridal perfection, but her jaw clenched, and her eyes knives. She stepped off the wedding stage, so quickly she nearly tripped on her own veil, heels clicking like gunfire across the marble floor as she charged. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, lips tight. "You brought a fake fiancé to my wedding?" Julian didn't blink. "Fake," he said coolly. "That's an interesting accusation. For someone who didn't even remember her sister owns 3 patents, speaks fluent French, and volunteers every Saturday teaching literacy workshops downtown." Samantha faltered. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Julian continued, voice like silk with an edge of steel. "If this is a hoax, then she's played it for years, working 2 jobs while developing scalable models for community reading centers. But something tells me that kind of grit wouldn't make it into your curated Instagram stories." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Samantha's groom, Preston, stepped in then, all forced charm and political smoothness. "Let's not make this into something it's not," he said, offering Julian a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's their day. We don't want any distractions." Julian turned slightly toward him. Of course, wouldn't want the truth stealing focus. Preston's brow twitched. "There's no need for drama." Julian cocked his head. "Then perhaps the bride shouldn't publicly accuse her sister of deception." I stood quietly beside him, heart pounding, unsure whether to retreat or speak. But then I looked out at the room, the same faces that once made me feel like I didn't belong, not anymore. "I didn't come here to make a scene," I said, voice stronger than I expected. "I came because I thought maybe, just maybe, I still mattered to this family." Samantha's face darkened. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Claire." I shook my head. "No, I've always had a voice. You just trained yourselves not to hear it." A few guests stirred uncomfortably. My mother looked down at her napkin. My father's jaw twitched. "I didn't ask Julian to do this," I said clearly. "I didn't ask for attention or pity. I came here tonight in a dress I made myself, in borrowed heels, because I wanted to support you." I looked directly at Samantha, who narrowed her eyes. But instead of kindness, I got snickers and whispers. From people who used to hold me when I cried. From people who used to call me family. The silence was full, unforgiving. I kept going. "I'm done shrinking," I said. "Done pretending that your opinions define my worth." Samantha stepped forward. "Oh, please. You're playing victim because it gets you sympathy." Julian's voice was low, but it carried across the room. "Sympathy is the last thing she wants. She came alone. That takes more strength than anyone here has shown all night." Samantha's mouth curled. "What exactly are you getting out of this? Her nonprofit's a joke." Julian turned fully toward her now, expression unreadable. "No, Samantha," he said slowly. "What's a joke is a family that claps louder for strangers than they do for their own blood. What's a joke is a woman trying to build something meaningful being laughed off the stage by the people who should have funded her first." The air went razor thin. "I read Claire's proposal," he added, "and I've worked with people who talk a big game about changing the world. But she's the real thing, the kind who shows up, even when no one claps." Samantha looked like she might burst into flames. I took a breath. "You don't get to define me anymore." My voice didn't tremble. My knees didn't weaken. I felt grounded. I've spent years being told I wasn't enough, too quiet, too idealistic, too much or not enough of the right things. But I've had enough of that. I turned to the crowd. I'm proud of what I've built, of the students I've helped, of the work I do, and whether any of you clap for it or not, it matters. Julian extended his arm again. Shall we? I looked once more at my parents, who didn't speak. At my brother, who finally dropped his gaze. At Samantha, whose face was white with rage. Then I took Julian's arm and nodded. We turned and walked, slowly, deliberately, out of the ballroom. But this time I didn't feel like an afterthought. This time I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful. The hush behind us wasn't filled with pity. It was filled with fear. Julian's car was parked beneath the glowing canopy of the Astoria's private valet entrance. Sleek, black, and silent, like it had been waiting all evening in the shadows. The moment the door shut behind, me and I settled into the leather seat. It felt like the world finally exhaled. The noise, the champagne-fueled whispers, the marble floors full of judgment, all gone. Left behind in that chandelier-lit ballroom that once made me feel like I didn't matter. I turned to Julian, who sat with his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, watching me with something that looked like patience, but also like something else, something softer. I still don't understand, I said quietly, my voice breaking the silence between us. You showing up, you pretending, saying all those things, why? Julian looked away for a second, then reached into the console between us and pulled out his phone. I was going to wait, he said. But after tonight, I think you deserve the truth. He tapped a few times on the screen, then held it out, toward me. It was a photo, a bit grainy, slightly tilted, like it had been taken quickly and in secret. But there was no mistaking what I was looking at, or who. It was me, standing behind the counter at the bookstore, one hand on a cart of returns, the other gesturing mid-sentence. I was clearly mid-conversation, probably recommending a book, or giving directions to the poetry section. I didn't take it, Julian said gently. My assistant did, months ago, when she first visited the store. I looked at him, confused. She was doing preliminary work for a nonprofit initiative I've been building, he continued. We were researching people working in education and community literacy. She saw your blog, your essays, your name on a few grant rejections, and then found the bookstore. He paused, watching my expression. She told me you'd probably never apply for the position because you'd assume we'd want someone with flashier credentials. Ivy League, corporate history. But she saw something in your writing. Said, "This woman cares. The way she writes, she means every word." I stared at the screen. The blurry image of me, small and ordinary, suddenly weightier than any portrait I'd ever posed for. I visited the store the next day, Julian said, to see for myself. No name, no suits, no expectations, just curiosity. And I handed you a first edition bel canto, I murmured. Told you to keep it. He smiled. You said some stories deserve to be held, not shelved. I never forgot that. I looked away, trying to gather myself. I didn't lie to you, Claire, he said quietly, but I also didn't explain the full reason I was there tonight. I didn't want you to think this was a stunt or a test. So what was it? I asked, heart pounding. He hesitated. I wanted to offer you the position, he said. Director of our National Literacy Initiative. Fully funded. Entirely yours to lead. But then I saw your name on that wedding guest list, unaccompanied, and I realized it was bigger than a job. I blinked. You saw the guest list? Julian nodded. Samantha's groom's company is partially invested in a tech firm I sit on the board of. I saw the invite list during a casual meeting last week. Your name was there. Alone. I couldn't stop thinking about what that meant, what it said about how they still treat you. My throat tightened. I looked down at my hands in my lap. You wanted to protect me. He nodded once. And I wanted to remind them that no matter how they try to erase you, someone sees you. A wave of emotion crested in my chest. But this time, it didn't feel like humiliation or regret. It felt like recognition. I turned to him. You want to fund my reading program? I want to build it with you, he corrected softly. I want to invest in what you believe in. No headlines, no branding, just you, doing what you already do, changing lives, but with the resources you were always denied. Tears stung behind my eyes. I pitched it to my family, I whispered. They told me it was too sentimental, too ambitious, too me. And that's exactly why it'll work, he said. Because you give a damn. You're not just checking a box. You live this work. I stared at him, emotions flooding in faster than I could process them. I'm not used to this, I admitted. To what? Being seen. Believed in. Not because someone wants something, but because they actually think I matter. Julian's gaze didn't waver. You matter, he said. More than you've been told. More than they ever allowed you to feel. We sat in silence for a long moment. The hum of passing cars outside, the light patter of rain beginning to touch the windshield, the city exhaling in the distance. It was the kind of quiet that didn't beg to be filled, the kind that simply held you. I turned slightly toward him. Why me? I asked. Why this much effort? He smiled, slow and certain. Because you remind me of who I used to be before all this. All this. The suits, the headlines, the boardrooms. There was a time I just wanted to do good, quietly, honestly. Then the noise got louder. The people around me got shinier, and I forgot what it felt like to believe in something pure. I couldn't stop the tears this time. I let them fall. Gently, freely. Julian reached across the console and took my hand, his touch warm and grounding. You gave me that book like I was someone worth trusting, he said. So let me return the favor. I looked at him. Really. Looked at him and saw something beyond the name, the net worth, or the headlines. I saw a man who understood being underestimated. Who knew what it meant to fight for space in rooms designed to shrink you. And he had walked into my room and made sure no one looked through me again. I woke the next morning with sunlight slipping through the curtains of my tiny apartment, illuminating the chipped paint on the windowsill and the paperback novels stacked like bricks beside my bed. It should have felt like any other Sunday, except it didn't. My phone buzzed on the nightstand before I even got out of bed. A text. Samantha. Yuna. Think this is over? That stunt might have worked last night, but don't forget. I know who you really are. The words sat heavy on the screen, sharp and venom-laced. I stared at them for a long time before locking the phone and placing it face down. I should have known she wouldn't let it end there. By noon, I found out what she meant. Posts started appearing online, anonymous accounts sharing blurry college party photos from nearly a decade ago, headlines twisted out of context from a local blog interview I gave about student debt, even one post implying that I was faking an engagement with Julian for media attention. I didn't need confirmation to know who was behind it. Samantha always preferred the knife in the back to the face. My stomach twisted as the notifications rolled in. Julian called. Are you okay? He asked, voice low but controlled. I don't know, I admitted. It's like she dug through every scrap of my past just to smear it in public. I know, he said. She's scared. She's furious, which means she's exposed. There was a pause. I'm handling it, he said. I blinked. What do you mean? I'm calling a press conference, not to defend myself, to elevate you. Julian, no. She wants the world to think you're some desperate hanger-on who latched onto a rich man to feel important. But we're not going to argue. We're going to tell the truth. I swallowed. What truth? That you didn't need a stage to matter. You were already building something before I ever walked into that bookstore. I hesitated. What if it makes things worse? It won't. I promise. 3 hours later, I stood behind Julian in the small but crowded lounge of a midtown hotel. Rows of reporters buzzed with restrained curiosity. Camera flashes blinked like stars. Microphones were lined up on a simple podium bearing the Harlow Foundation logo, Julian's nonprofit branch, soon to launch its first national campaign. He adjusted the mic. Calm, unshaken, impossibly poised. I won't take much of your time, he began, his voice steady and composed. There's been some noise in the last 24 hours about a woman named Claire Monroe. Rumors, stories, mischaracterizations. He glanced over his shoulder at me, and I froze, heart pounding. For those wondering who she is, let me be clear. He turned back to the crowd. Claire is not my PR stunt. She's not my project. And she's certainly not an accessory to my name. Reporters leaned forward. Phones came up. She is, he said, the founder and director of the National Literacy Initiative, launching next month. A program built from the ground up to serve children in underserved communities, with a model designed and authored entirely by her. I gasped softly, hand clutching the edge of the podium behind him. He didn't stop. She is a writer, a scholar, a woman who gave away a first edition book because she believed some stories are meant to be held. She's the reason this program exists, and frankly, the reason I still believe in it. He paused just long enough to let the weight settle. She doesn't need my name, he added. She already won. The silence was beautiful, absolute. Then the cameras flashed louder than applause ever could. That evening, I returned to my apartment. I didn't take a car service. I didn't step into some luxury penthouse. I walked home from the subway, just like I always had. Past the bodega with the flickering open sign, past the mural of birds someone had painted over an old laundromat wall, past the place that had always been mine, small, imperfect, real. I made tea. I sat on the couch and I breathed. Not the shallow kind of breath you take when you're trying not to cry, but the deep, settling kind. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to disappear. I had no makeup on. My inbox was flooded. My phone kept buzzing, but I didn't check it. I just sipped my tea and looked around at the life I'd built, brick by humble brick. A knock came at the door around 8. I knew it was him before I even reached for the handle. Julian stood there in a navy coat. No security detail, no media circus, just him. In his hands, the same first edition bel canto I'd once handed him with a smile and no second thought. He held it out to me, carefully. You gave this to me without asking anything in return, he said, but I think it belongs here now. I took the book slowly, my fingertips brushing his. It's always been yours, I whispered. He shook his head. It was a promise, one I planned to keep. We sat in the living room, quiet. No grand speeches, no declarations, just comfort. The kind you don't have to earn, the kind that finds you when you've stopped pretending. And as the rain began tapping gently against the window, I looked down at the book in my lap, then back at him. You know, I said softly. For a long time, I thought I had to shrink to make everyone else comfortable. Julian nodded. I know, but I don't feel small anymore. He smiled, leaning forward just slightly. That's because you never were. For the first time in years, I believed it. Not because someone told me, not because I had something to prove, but because I could finally see it for myself. I wasn't a disappointment. I wasn't a shadow. I was the story they never saw coming. And now, I was just getting started.